second session of الطبقات الصوفية of Sudani.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين به المستعين، وهو الأول وهو الآخر وهو الظاهر وهو الباطن، لا إله إلا هو، لا إله إلا الله. All praise due to Allah, Lord of the worlds. He is the first and the last, the manifest and the hidden. There is no reality but He. Inshallah, we'll continue on our talks of Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami, who last week I mentioned was one of the early exponents of classical tasawwuf. I mean, he wrote one of the most important texts of biographies of the awliyas, or the friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in that period of time, between the death of Hallaj, or the martyrdom of Hallaj, and the fall of Baghdad to the Mongols, was a period where Sufism became more established, more integrated, more regulated, and more enmeshed in the life of the Muslim community. And it was one of the ways in which Islam was knit as practically a seamless whole, from the furthest west in Andalus and Maghreb and to the east. It had reached at that point the Indian subcontinent, hadn't yet quite made it to Java and to the East Indies. But if you were a traveler, say in the 11th century, 12th century, and you moved from the west to the east, or from the east to the west, there was a continuity or continuum in the spiritual life of people. And it was defined in its outer forms, of course, by the various milestones of the year of the Sharia and the duties and obligations of the individual towards society. The need to maintain a kind of social cohesiveness between individual practice and social practice. And Tasawwuf, which was very much an outlier, as it were, in the first 2 or 3 centuries of Islam, moved into the mainstream and began to color the spiritual and religious life of people. And in this period between the formalization, let's say, of the textual basis of Tasawwuf, which came in the form of these books of biographies, anecdotes of the great awliyas, their sayings, their maxims. There was also a more rigorous attempt to create a kind of foundation for the teaching and the transmission of Tasawwuf. Before that, it had been very much an individual affair, and to some extent very localized, built around the sage or the individual sheikh in various points of the compass, without there being a kind of overarching order to it. But with the rise of these the textual foundations of Tasawwuf, we move to the next stage, which is the stage of tariqas. That is the organization of the spiritual life of the community in a much more formal way. And that's when the rise of the great tariqas started, the 4 original ones, the 4 great ones. And then the subsequent bifurcations that came out of them. And you had in the let's call it the heartland. It was then the heartland, it's no longer heartland. The heartland of the Middle East, you had the rise of great beings such as Abdul Qadir al-Gilani in Baghdad, Sayyid Ahmad al-Rafai, also from the southern parts of Iraq, from an area called Batayah, where the marshes are. And you had Abu Hassan al-Shazili in the far west. And you had a number of individuals, out of whom tariqas developed subsequently. They're not founders of tariqas as such. Most of the tariqas or the orders in which defined and which framed the spiritual life of Muslims were not founded by individuals. I mean, they might be named eponymously after for example, the Qadris are connected to Abdul Qadir al-Gilani. The Rafa'is are connected to Sayyid Ahmad al-Rafai. The Shazilis to Hassan al-Shazili, and so on. In reality, they were individuals, they were great beings who attracted very huge audiences and gatherings. But they were more teachers, they were more like teaching sheikhs rather than founders of specific doctrines and orders. And it's usually their followers that establish that. And of course you have the great tradition associated with Jalaluddin Rumi in Konya, which was taken to another level organizationally by those who came after. One of the great tariqas that was actually founded by the person after whom it's named was the Sahrawardi tariqa. It was founded by Sheikh Umar Sahrawardi in Baghdad. And he founded it really as a mechanism. He went beyond the teaching role as a mechanism by which the divisions within the body of Islam, especially in the Middle East, not so much in the Iraqi, between the Sunnis and the Shias, were becoming extremely problematic for the stability of the Khilafah. And the next to last of the Abbasi Khalifas, a man called Khalifa Nasr al-Dinullah, was the one who sort of turned Sufism into a formal mechanism by which the two branches of Islam could be united. And the great captain of this work was Umar al-Sahrawardi, Sheikh Umar al-Sahrawardi. And for a very short period of time, the major divisions, the doctrinal divisions of Islam, were transcended in the Sufi tariqas of Sheikh Umar al-Sahrawardi, and were transcended through a body of practice. You can call it Sufism light if you want, but in reality it has its own flavor, which is the practice of futuwa. In the West, this is it became known as chivalry. The whole matter of the conduct associated with courage, with nobility, with dignity, was another pillar in the scaffolding that was supposed to cement Islam away from doctrinal Sharia-based divisions into a kind of spiritual union, a spiritual practice, a spiritual method. And this practice of futuwa was also dealt with textually by Abdurrahman al-Sulami, the person who I talked about last week. And he wrote his book called The Way, it's been translated as The Way of Sufi Chivalry. It's actually called Kitab al-Futuwa in Arabic, the Book of Futuwa. And I think it was translated and published by Sheikh Kabir. So this path of Futuwa, you can see it as parallel to Sufism, parallel to the Sufi tariqah. But it's much more to do with the spirituality of daily work Sufism can, of course, it's supposed to imbue and to color your perceptions and your exchange and your interaction with reality, with the haqq. And in as much as that affects your daily conduct, then obviously it will have an effect on the workplace. But Futuh was designed specifically to bring some of the key maxims and precepts of tasawwuf into work, into people's workplace, and became the backbone of basically the Islamic economy, if you want to call it that. It was the backbone of the guilds, the backbone of the artisanal classes, the backbone of crafts. And as you went hierarchically, it became associated with the perfected conduct of people in the government, people in the administration, people in the professions such as medicine and so on. And for centuries after that, until really very recently, I'd say until, well, now it exists only in Iran, but until in my lifetime, I saw the last of the cloisters, if you want to call it, of Ahl al-Futuh, where I remember my late grandfather, and he was a merchant, and he was going to his khan, to his places where he kept his stock and warehouse and so on. They stopped at what is known as, became known as a Zur Khana, the house of strength. And there, it's like a pit where it's like a sort of a medieval gym, as it were. And you had people, individuals, depending on their grades, to some extent it's like, black belt in judo and so on, and green belt and so on. Depending on your grade, you had a certain position in this theater. And there was a small place for audiences, and they exercised before they went to work to a rhythm, a spiritual rhythm. And depending which part of the Muslim world you're in, whether you are in Egypt, they have a different rhythm. In Egypt, it was the rhythm of the saints like Sarah. In India, it was also known as Durkhana, and it was commented upon by a lot of the travelers, and it continued until the early 20th century. In Iraq, it was built around love of the Prophet and love of Imam Ali in particular. And the exercises were done to a beat of drums, and it's hypnotic drums. And as they became more and more difficult or strenuous, you started off by doing kind of push-ups, and you had chains and so on. And then you use these big dumbbells. And basically you brought yourself into a spiritual realization, a spiritual awakening, which then charged you for the work in front of you. And in work, you can have bosses whose people who work for them were hired hierarchically in the Futuh, and they dealt with them, or they related to them. They related to them in the capacity of spiritually advanced, even though they were materially in a different relationship. And in Turkey they were called the Akhis, and a lot of the Akhis were close together with the Sufi orders by Ataturk. In fact, they were banned as a kind of anti-modern means of organizing the workforce, and they were replaced by the notorious unions, trade unions. So instead of having Akhis, in Iran they're called Jabal Nardi. In the Arab world they're called the Asnaf. And they were replaced in the last of them I saw, as I said, in the 1950s. And now they become tourist attractions and restaurants and so on. But the entire spiritual world of Islam, and what I want to say is that this migrated also, which is the second part of it, migrated to the Western world through Spain. This practice combined in a very, very, as I said, in a seamless way, one's work with one's spiritual duties. And one was not seen to contradict the other. You may say that, well, it was in a pre-modern economy, so you didn't have to go and clock in, and you didn't have to look at your watch and 9 to 5 and all that. True, but the relationship to work was fundamentally different when you are in this state of heightened awareness of the meaning and purpose and direction of work. And the conduct, now, here I'm idealizing, of course, because there's a great deal of abuse, there's a great deal of oppressiveness in these relationships, economic relationships between people in pre-modern times. But at its best, it had, I think, all the advantages of combining rigorous and rational focus on the demands of the hour of the work, together with a powerful realization of the purpose to which work is done. And
I saw a trace of that also in Egypt when I was growing up. Not the way you described it, but I remember construction workers would always be doing their work and chanting some zikr, and going up and down and carrying them, doing really hard physical labor, but they're always in the state of remembrance,
Yeah, I mean, these can also be like sort of, you can say these are like the gospel songs in the American South and so on, where hard labor is accompanied with a form of remembrance.
And this is all the way back to the top, they're digging the trench.
Absolutely.
Same thing,
But Futu went somewhat more than that. I mean, it was all of us here, I mean, I suppose most of us here with a sort of professional, academic, managerial type of background. 100 years ago, you would all be associated with one way or another with one of these gifts. And you would take this, imbibe this as part of your daily existence. And there was very little difference also between workplace and spiritual place. In the Khan, for example, in my grandfather, it was a very large space, which was for a kind of daily dhikr. Yeah. It was part of the design of the workplace. And as this moved across the Islamic world, obviously it moved into Andalusia or Spain, and through various points, mainly in Cordoba and Toledo and so on, the culture associated with Futuwa began to seep into Christendom. And through various agents and through various, including some crusading knights, some of the crusading knights that came back, and Knights Templars, for example, brought back from the Holy Land, from Palestine, a lot of these practices, and they came mainly to the Teutonic north. Most of the Crusaders came from an area which is now northwest France and Belgium. The other great crusade from a Christian point of view was, of course, there were three major crusades. One is against the Muslims in the Holy Land. The other one was the marches and the borderlands against the Slavs, which was held by the Teutonic Knights. And the third great sanctioned crusade, as it were, by the Church, was the Reconquista, the one in Spain. And the interchange between Islam and the Reconquista in Spain affected mainly Southern Europe. So you had, through the Futuwa orders and through the exposure of the knights, and sometimes the so-called Mudajjas, the people Muslims who stayed behind in lands that were occupied or reoccupied by by the Reconquista. Not all of them were expelled. Something like perhaps half the population of the Reconquista were Muslims protected by their Christian overlords. So the culture, not necessarily the deen, but the culture of Islam and the culture of futur, culture of spiritual practice merged with work and merged with what I would call social action, because that's another aspect of futur that I'd love to talk about. Entered into the Western environment. Another great misconception that people have is that the Muslims in Spain were either Arabs or Berbers. This is absolutely false. The vast majority of Muslims in Spain were Andalusians, Spaniards. They kept their Christianity in the first 2 centuries. But afterwards there was a kind of dramatic shift of allegiance. And by the 2nd century of the presence of Islam in Andalusia, nearly all of them, all the locals, that is the Vandals, who were the main population groups of Spain, became Muslim. So, I mean, as an aside, when Muslims were finally expelled in the 17th century, 100 years after the fall of Granada, most of them ended up either in North Africa, but a lot went to the Middle East. And some of them you can clearly see the European features, the non-Semitic features, or non-Berber features. So the practice of tasawwuf came into the Christian world, into Christendom, through these nodes of exchange, Cordoba, mainly Toledo, and through knights who became enamored by the manifest success, as it were, of these orders. Of course, they were given a different flavor as they moved into southern France, Provence, and so on, and they became part of this troubadour tradition, which then moved north. So, people talk about the alien religion of Islam and so on. There's so much intermingling at both points of contact, east through the Ottomans and west through Spain. It's a country disconnected to. And there are many, I think, sound academic treatises that shows the really deep effect of Sufism and also futur on some of the great landmark works of Western literature. Dante's Divine Comedy, for example. There's a famous book written by a man called Asim Palacios, who's a priest, a Jesuit priest, which shows the extent of borrowings of Dante from the Kitab al-Isra of Ibn Arabi. So the moral of the story really is that as you delve deeper into the ethical and spiritual foundations of great spiritual traditions, they can easily seep into other inner dimensions of other great religions, and they metamorphose into something that is peculiar to that civilization, but clearly you can see the points of connection. And the whole practice of chivalry might sound a bit sort of archaic or anachronistic now. People open doors for women, or so Walter Ragnar wearing his cloak in front of Queen Elizabeth so she doesn't get her feet wet. This is really just the Hollywood version of it. It's a foundational system of creating and living the nobility of conduct. In many ways, I call this the heroic dimension of inner Islam. We see it primarily in terms of perfecting qualities that allow you to engage with the dialogue with the unseen, as it were. And as you perfect these qualities, the depth of your insight expands and becomes more, you become more open to signals and to onrushes that will then bring you to another level. So Sufism and Tasawwuf is primarily that. It is primarily the cultivation of the inner realities and the inner realm in order to facilitate this dialogue. Now, out of that comes a set of conduct, a set of action, but not necessarily. There are many people, for example, who feel that the so-called malamatiya or malamia, as the Turks call it, where your inner reality is expressed by an opposite outer conduct. You do what you make people repelled by your actions, so that you don't make them aware of your inner state and condition. It's a kind of reversing the code. This is a recognized school where outer action is, in many ways, appears to be contrary to inner conditions. And there is a reality behind that. There's a reality behind the malamiyah. So, in Tasawwuf, in classical Tasawwuf, and I think all the tariqas, there is a kind of space which is the adepts and their shuyukh build around them. And their contact with the outside world comes primarily through the institutional mechanisms of the taqiyya or the khanaqah, as it's known in Iran, or the zawiyas, as it's known in the Arab world. And there is some limited interchange with the rest of the public, but not necessarily an ongoing involvement and commitment to social action. That action is subservient to realization in Tasawwuf. Not always, but mainly that's the case. Because the path of Tasawwuf is a path of inner enlightenment, out of which there may or may not be outer purpose. And if there is no outer purpose, then so be it. You're nevertheless in a position of heightened enlightenment. So what do you do when you are, if you have a predilection to action, predilection to service, predilection to commitment and engagement? So this is where I think the heroic dimension of Sufism comes in, and I call futur, or the chivalric practice, the heroic dimension of Sufism, in the sense that the qualities of courage, of nobility, is expressed in the form of service to people, is expressed in the form of action for people. And throughout history, each of the neighborhoods had its own futur orders, which by and large were connected to the prevailing Sufi tariqah of that town or that neighborhood. But in some cases not. I mean, in some cases they were connected to an individual spiritually realized person with no tariqah. But they defended the community, they helped the poor, they took charge of welfare when there's a calamity. They were like a combination of the ambulance, of the St. John's ambulance and the fire brigade, self-defense, civil defense. In times of stress and conflict, they were out there to protect, and also to a police force. But governed, very highly governed by an elaborate system of courteous, noble conduct. And there is, of course, a spiritual reality to this. It's not something that comes out of the blue. And because of this overlapping with Sufi tariqas, you can call it a kind of work-based Sufism, or if you want, Sufism light, because it is much less, it's concerned with enlightenment, obviously, but the enlightenment comes through action rather than through reflection. It comes from doing rather than contemplating. And I think to some extent, you can't substitute one for the other. The loss of this dimension of the nobility that comes from doing service, from defending, without reward, without a sense that there is a kind of transactional basis to it. The loss of that, I think, is first of all keenly felt in the world where these existed before, but it's also felt, I think, wherever I've seen groups such as this in the West, is that this kind of coupling mechanism, the mechanism that transfers the spiritual energy that exists in circles such as this to outer action, is sometimes not well designed or well ordered. And part of that maybe is the loss of this element, which comes from a kind of marriage between work and worship, if you want to call it that, or better still, work and perfecting the noble quality. It might be difficult to see where the nobility is in sitting and doing sort of pedantic work in front of a screen, or if you're unfortunate enough to work in a steel mill or something, then you're constantly badgered by sound and noise and heat and so on. But I think it's absolutely necessary, and that's from my experience. If you're not able to extricate yourself from the grossness of the workplace, and it is, many people say, they love their work and so on, fine. But if you look at it in the context of the disturbances that can accumulate at workplaces, most of these disturbances are very, very detrimental, and they can be quite disruptive. And you can't really break it by saying, "Oh, it's 5 o'clock, I have to leave," or in the middle of the workplace you decide to do your salah, or whatever you do, your meditation. You can do it. There's no question about that. But it's like doing something in isolation outside of a much broader framework. Now, as in many cases, there are some movements that in the Western world that have basically superseded that, and they have taken on a life of their own. And to some extent, they've defined the relationship between the spiritual and the practical, or the worshipful and the workplace. I mean, I'm not thinking of things like Opus Dei and conspiracies of this kind and so on. But in some cases, they are more advanced. They have found a mechanism by which work and spiritual realization is not compartmentalized. The key here is to be in a state of organic continuity, not a state of compartmentalization. It's very, very problematic to achieve that. I mean, I'm the first one to tell you it's not easy. It's not easy not only because objectively it's difficult, but because the supporting structures don't exist. And I've been thinking about this for years, but every time it starts to falls apart because there isn't, as it were, the doctrinal base to it. There isn't the foundational work that needs to be done to create the equivalent of the Sufi practices in the workplace without being disruptive. I mean, you don't want to be in a situation where you create unnecessary disruption to your colleagues who may not share what you're doing. But also in terms of the engagement with communities. It's much more difficult to still parachute yourself in as a kind of fixer from being involved in what they're doing without necessarily having an agenda. And I found that the loss of this dimension is really critical because it is one of the few mechanisms left where we're able to connect with a society, and now it's civilizations that are moving in an entirely different direction, and we know that that direction is wrong. How do you achieve that if a third of your time you're asleep, a third of your time you're working, more than a third of your time? And it comes by example. It also flows into what I had been saying earlier, and that is we need to sort of look at reality, not from the point of the base of the pyramid looking at the apex, or sitting at the apex of the pyramid looking at the base. Rather, floating on top, being in a condition where you see both the apex and the base. You see both at the same time. And you're able to relate the gross to the subtle, the dense to the luminous, in a sort of continuous way, in a way that feeds back into a kind of feedback loop, and increase your insight. The workplace here, we have to find a mechanism by which, not by simply because you want to serve people, but because you want to find a mechanism by which you don't compartmentalize your life into these different segments, and there is very little relationship between them. Again, it doesn't mean that you have to always be in the company of like-minded, like-hearted people. You can't really choose who you work with most of the time. Somebody else makes a choice. But you can be in that place, motivated and driven and inspired by the desire, as it were, to perfect these qualities. And these qualities are all related in the end to the names and the attributes by which we relate to, or what we conceive of as the attributes of the unseen. And they fall into the four classical categories. The last category, the category of action, is the one that I think has been released. The first one is the category of ahadiyya, the unicity of category. The absolute as one, the absolute as unknowable. These are characteristics and qualities that we cannot aspire to. We cannot aspire to absolute. We cannot aspire to be a singularity. Then there are the characteristics of the juxtaposition between power and majesty and beauty and clemency, the Jamal Jalal dichotomy. It's not a dichotomy, the Jamal juxtaposition. And these are names and attributes that we have the inner mechanism to understand the relationship that we have with their essence. We all know what they mean. And if you are predisposed in one direction or the other, then you build on that in order to expand your horizon through these particular channels. But the last one, the one of action, I don't see many people paying much attention to it, frankly. But it's to do with power, it's to do with will, it's to do with fashioning, and it's to do with the names of Al-Qadir, Al-Qadir, Musawwir. And people don't really connect the dots. We know we can't go on the first, and the last is ignored, and we concentrate on the middle, the Jamali or the Jalali aspects. But the aspects of action is what in my mind has driven the main school of idealist philosophy in the West. Now, it's not God-centered. We all know that. God doesn't feature. It does. In the 19th century, it did to some extent, behind the scenes. But it is the philosophy of dealing with quote-unquote reality, the outer reality. And the only way that you can deal with outer reality is by changing it, or by engaging with it, or by dominating it, or by controlling it, or by defending from it. This is how the modern world is constructed now. It's constructed around the remnants, the fragments, of what's left of idealist philosophies and added to what's happened in the last. But if you take schools, for example, existentialism, it is to do with that. It is to do with the desire, the seeking of personal freedoms. The whole mess that we've had in the last, since the counterculture of the 1960s until now, is to do with the sense that human beings can only become authentic, quote unquote, if they enhance and expand their personal freedoms. But because it's not centered around any scheme of action, a scheme which privileges the drive towards noble action, the drive towards heroic action, the drive towards constructive action, it becomes then a spiral of self-obsessiveness. I'm not here to critique what's happened in the last 50 years, but we have, as it were, the technology to be able to refashion this sort of neglected aspect of tasawwuf, the aspect of action, the aspect of service. And it falls very much within the classical framework. But because the ethic of action was to some extent wedded to or twinned with a civilization that had the outer forms of Islam as its mantle, as its cloak, this outer form no longer exists. I mean, it doesn't exist anywhere. It may exist superficially in here or there, or you may have fleeting glimpses of it, but as an all-encompassing worldview, which enters into, as it were, your DNA makeup, doesn't exist anymore. So it is much easier, therefore, for those seekers to concentrate on the path of self-knowledge, self-realization, inner awareness, rather than the path of action, because the path of action can be blocked at every single point. And we have to redefine the meaning of work, the meaning of even time. The meaning of time has changed. Now, you can't just sort of step back and say, well, the outer world is hostile, we cannot mold it in a way that we think it should be molded, therefore we're going to withdraw, or limit our engagement with it, or compartmentalize, which is the most likely and the most easy path, compartmentalize our engagement with it. We'll engage with it as a modern, progressive person in one way, and then afterward we'll do this, or certain periods of time we'll do that. So life becomes then, in my mind, fragmented. There is no organic unity to it as a whole. And you can't really create it by withdrawing or by going into a kind of commune or into some kind of hijrah. You can try. If you're an individual, it may work. But you have to be prepared to go through the whole cycle of withdrawal and the consequences of that. But if you want to work through a communal structure and affect the broader society, then I think we have to reconfigure this dimension of action and service within ways and patterns that are understood in our broader environment. And the broader environment, I think, does understand the meaning of, say, heroic action. There is in every culture, in every civilization, there is the kind of continuity with these precepts. Here we talk about heroic action. Most people in the West probably, they don't think of football heroes, but those who think deep. Go back to the Greeks, go back to the Latins, and understand the heroes of antiquity. And why were they heroes? Why were the qualities associated with the Roman Republic such a powerful element in the formation of say, Western political thought, modern thought. So there is that dimension, that is the effulgence of the self through its motivation, its desire to materialize in its actions those qualities that it believes it can materialize or optimize. And the ethic of action, and by action I don't mean just going out and doing, but the ethics of purposeful action is a deeply spiritual aspect of tasawwuf. And it is from this perspective, I think, that we should pay some attention to what had been written about it in the past. But don't take these texts as sort of sacred in quotes. They're not. They're written for a certain period. So some of them are written in ways that are really not intelligible now. Some of the anecdotes and examples don't really make much sense. Some of them appear very trite and commonplace. But that doesn't mean that this aspect of it, this aspect of tasawwuf, cannot be resurrected. Maybe not by me, but by others who want to, who feel the need and desire to engage with a broader community that doesn't share and may not share at any point in the near future, or even long term, any of the real deep precepts that you have. But they do respond to selfless action. They do respond to action that protects the weak. They do respond to action that elevates the miserable and depressed. They do respond to action of sharing and generosity. And now I think in this day and age, it's much more necessary. Probably any time in my life, it's becoming more and more as we see these massive gaps open up between peoples in particular countries and between countries. And the way that the modern economy now is structured, it's not that it's a despiritualized workplace, it's a destructive workplace. And it's like an engine that you cannot really control, and it seems to crush everything in front of it. And any attempts to find some weak chinks in it and wait for Armageddon, it's not going to work. And also the attempts to create a kind of alternative ways of living also doesn't appear to have worked so far. I mean, 99% of all alternative lifestyles have collapsed. All the hippies that I used to know now are either investment bankers or very ruthless businessmen, some of them. I saw him the other day and I reminded him of the early days. And he said that was those days. This is today. So you can have what drives people, if it's not anchored in a deeply rooted structure of purposeful and ethical action, can be easily subverted. And in fact, it can disguise the most base and the most coarse instincts. Alhamdulillah.
And open it up for some questions.
I find all this extremely interesting, and thank you for suggesting all these things. But it's always puzzled me that Islam doesn't have an explicit doctrine of the right livelihood. I mean, there is no parallel to the Buddhist concept, which is known as that. Despite the prohibitions about alcohol, gambling, usury, etc. And I mean, I wonder how the perspective that you're describing would relate to a world where a lot of the activity is actually either useless or harmful, including potential harms to the environment and to other people's health and things like this. I'd just like to know what comments you have on that.
No, I think it's essential. I mean, the whole, if you talk about the environment, it's to do with the man-nature relationship. The man-nature relationship hardly ever features, and there are few people who write about it, but it means nothing to most people. Nature is there. They hit upon certain hadith that says, nature is there to be exploited and enjoyed and so on. but it's to be enjoyed with a high degree of moderation and in a very conditional way. There's a need to bring out this kind of ethic. The man-nature relationship is really, I think, absolutely essential to any kind of engagement with the more, let's say, the more concerned, the more advanced elements of society. And classical Islam, in my mind, had ended with the modern era. So it has, it's very interesting to read, Sunnis, but how it relates to today's needs and concerns. It's like Ibn Arabi was very interesting. If you can put your mind in the world of the 13th century or 15th century or up to the 19th century, you're entitled to think this way. You can't think this way. But I would say that nobody is capable of thinking this way anymore. I say that as a statement of fact because the pervasiveness of the precepts of the modern world are so deep and so deeply rooted that the best you can do is to fortify yourself by a kind of purposeful attempt to decouple the way that you live and the way that you think from the outer world. And this only works for very, very few people, if at all. In the end, the demands of the outer world become overwhelming. I mean, for example, let's take Ibn Arabi, might know something about it. First thing you ask yourself now, how did this person earn his living? I mean, did he have a salary? Well, in actual fact, he did. He was a judge, and he was what they would call like a hanging judge. He was very severe in his judgments. So it's impossible now to have a person like that living a life of sort of a high court justice and being able to have the time and the leisure and the desire to come up with these effulgences. So one of the reasons why we don't have such great spiritual masters anymore, and we don't. I mean, I haven't seen in the last 100 years. Some come up and they mostly turn out to be flakes or frauds. It's because the environment is not enabling. It's not an enabling environment. So you have to go back. I mean, you mentioned the outer environment and our duty to it, and our duty to engage with it, and our duty to be responsible and accountable for what we do with it. But if you want to formulate a spiritual path to it, through the Sufi tradition, let's say, there's a disjunction somewhere around 100 years ago. So you either create, as it were, a new calculus for dealing with it, and this requires a great deal of effort and commitment, and also people living, as it were, living their ideals and living their commitments in ways that are tangible. So it's not that the Islam has nothing to say. It has a great deal to say, but the continuity of this tradition has been disrupted, and it's being revised now and revived in ways that are even more destructive. Because a lot of people have really opted out or have surrendered to understanding the realities of time and space through constructs that are deeply unspiritual, disenchanted. I don't know if that makes sense.
I don't know if I can formulate what I'm thinking, but what I heard from what you were saying was that within the soul, there's been sort of a gap or a deficit in terms of the spaces of actions or really become active. And I often find that within my own practice, within the circle, there is that action of compartmentalizing so you can live, and then you're outside of us, it's very involved with I don't know, social justice or whatever you need to do. Right? So it's really soothing to hear you talk about the names like that. And you talked earlier about reconfiguring. Someone I understood, you said that reconfiguring it in a way that is understood by society. So I'm guessing by that you mean what is already out there, so using the language that's already available to you and not necessarily working in a bubble. Is that sort of...
Yes, I think I might have said that before. We have to reimagine. We have to... we don't need to modernize anything. No spiritual insights don't have to be modernized, quote unquote. It's not like the frauds, the old car and bring a new car because there's electronic gadgets and so on. We have to reimagine it. The whole thing has to be reconfigured in a way that is real to itself and real to what is expected of it now. And that I mean, I don't want to cross certain boundaries here. I don't want to find people some might become upset if you cross certain boundaries. But you really have to question some of a great number of the givens, as it were. Because if you not question them in a destructive way, or question them with a sense of deconstructing them to show how trivial they are or how meaningless they are. But reimagining them in ways, because we all know that there are elements of this tradition that if you combine them become a very powerful and potent force for inner realization, enlightenment, and for outer well-being. We all know that, otherwise we'll be here. And you have chosen certain aspects on which to build this pathway, to cut this path. Others have chosen different paths. But these are all fragmentary events. You may connect with certain groups in the outer world who are, I don't know, musicians, or who are artists, or whatever, calligraphers. But most people are not artists or calligraphers or poets. Most people have mundane, silly jobs that they have to do in order to earn a living. Now, these people, this element of society was woven into the spiritual world in the past through mechanisms and structures that don't exist anymore. We have fashioned for ourselves here and other such circles ways in which we try to protect ourselves and also to uplift ourselves. Nothing, perfectly fine. Wonderful. But this is like an archipelago. And if these are not connected, there is no system. And if there are no systems, you cannot engage systemically in society. You can engage with elements of it. And they may be taken in by what you're doing and they may enjoy what you're doing. But it will always be tangential. It will always be supplemental rather than central. It's not going to happen in one day. This thing requires really a kind of shift in perspective, a complete, literally a spectrum shift. And it would require people living that for long periods of time. I mean, luckily now time is compressed, so you don't need centuries for that, maybe decades. If not, the outer forms will become so ossified and so structured that they will not really outlive the short term. Very few of the movements have lived on beyond a few decades. I mean, I've gone through them. I haven't gone through the whole, but I've been around for a long time, and I can tell you, none of them exist. None of them outlived their founders. But this is not the case for the systems that govern the modern world. They do outlive, and they have a certain, sometimes a very sinister life of their own. And so the way it's happening that each generation, or each half generation, develops for itself protective mechanisms and develops for itself links and networks that hopefully uplift and continues the vitality. So this is vital. It's not millions of people doing this, but it's a vital movement. And the vitality is there, it's real. But the vitality is not yet a vitality of action. It's a vitality of commitment. It's a vitality of individuals who have made a commitment and a desire, with a strong desire, to protect themselves from the perils of the world, in the sense of the perils of consciousness, wrong consciousness, and to protect themselves by being in company, and then to join in a common endeavor. But these are islands, and these islands, in order for them to have a reality, must connect, and they must stop being islands. They must become peninsulas and then landmasses. In time, I think, you can then begin to contemplate the possibility of a seamless life, a life in which work, the demands of the body, the demands of the mind of the spirit, are all fulfilled. These are ideals, but working towards an ideal like that, and wanting to connect with it in the Western world where we live now, requires that we have to understand what are the drives that are still there. I mean, it's not all doom and gloom. It's becoming darker, frankly, than it was 30, 40 years ago. But we want to be a kind of not a beacon. I don't say a beacon people come up to, but you want to be a light source that becomes available for those who have lost their legs.
Do you think this is occurred because of a move away from traditionalism, that should return to grassroots, of what the Sufi spiritual path really was many centuries ago, and actually return to that would have an impact on the surrounding society? But individual, because the Prophet, I mean, he actually stated that he states in the hadith about my brethren to come in the end of time. So there is this reference to that there are spiritual entities perhaps currently in the present moment that have that capacity to influence society.
Possible, but I really don't think we should. Well, I'll speak for myself. I call this all this a priori thinking. The kind of claims and assertions one makes may fulfill need for an individual, but they cannot be the basis, because all a priori claims like that can become greatly distorted and can be used in a very, very oppressive way also if they fall in the wrong hands. I mean, I'm really concerned that we do not lose the capacity for individual freedom. This to me is an essential element of action. So, for example, the traditional schools, the perennialists and so on, there is a sense that we're here where we are because we have not committed to the continuity of this golden age, as it were. There's never been a golden age. There may have been Arcadia at some point when the first human being emerged, but it's always been a struggle, a continuous, never-ending struggle that it's as if you're recreating the human potential at every point. The difficulties that you have now in achieving your potential are far, far greater than your counterpart 1,000 years ago. Believe me, it's much easier for them to do that. And we have to accept that. So therefore, I mean, if you want to quote hadith, I'll quote you one. The reward is related to the effort. The effort you have to put in now is enormous to get to that level. It's like a balloon that has a huge hole in it. You have to keep on blowing it just to keep it there. But we live in this world. We don't live in the world not of the medieval times. This world ended 100 years ago, 70 years ago. I saw the last vestiges of it in the Middle East and here, and also in America. Just the last echoes. But it's gone. And we have to exert that much more effort, that much more energy, that much more commitment and perseverance to bring it to the point where tradition is reinvented or reimagined, as it were, in the present context.
I have a kind of a comment question. Thank you for the talk as well. But one of the things I think where this thing is rooted is in culture, and especially the kind of and the artists and creatives may be the ones who can embody the sort of lifestyle in the individual, but maybe they're also the ones who can create a kind of cultural condition for it to spread into society, especially within the kind of like family structure as well. I mean, I grew up in an Iranian family, and I'm aware of a lot of the things you're emphasizing with the kind of need for serving. Even some of the things culturally we do, like in terms of serving tea in small glasses, so you can serve more frequently. The act of service is actually embedded into the culture to that level. I've in the last couple of years, I've spent most of my time working in what people would call like hipster kind of businesses, because I saw that there was a kind of re-enchantment with physical work within the population here. And so working in bakeries, breweries, kitchens and whatnot. And I found this to be quite fulfilling spiritually, trying to, but then most of the places I've worked start out really lovely, doing this physical work with natural products, and then as soon as it starts to make money, it becomes mechanized. Actually, it becomes into something that's going down that path. And so one of the questions I'm trying to understand is, if today's work is linked into the financial system in such a way that it goes on this kind of growth spurt, it will always be undermined because that's the nature of work. And so how does one have to avoid doing this sort of work with a financial connection, or is that the only way to avoid it, to stop that kind of undermining happening?
No, this is the model of the alternative economy and so on, which you can't sort of bounce along at near survival for very long in the world of finance capital. It's like a steamroller. It's not going to pay much attention to nice little business. If you're a successful micro brewer, somebody will come and take your brand and crush you. Artisanal bread, what happened to it here? It's turned into a corporate, and we have these AIM-listed companies that talk about artisanal bread. And no, I mean this is an archaic response. This is a response, a response of withdrawing from the broader world, going into a kind of collective, and trying to live out your ideals in a small scale. It can work, 99% of these enterprises don't. And if they are successful, one of the founders or one of the managers or whoever gets taken over by the dark force, as it were, and things just you have even in this area, you have to think outside the box. But you can see the idea of an alternative economy doesn't work up to a point. After that, it begins to weaken and then to fragment. But there are examples of cooperative or communal enterprises that have grown and have built around themselves sufficient barriers and competitive barriers to make their work successful. Now, the fact that you are spiritually minded doesn't mean you have to be chaotic in management or unconcerned about the requirements of managerial decision making. But there's a whole idea associated with the new economy now. It's coming up. A lot of people are thinking quite seriously about new forms in which, for example, capital can be concentrated. New kind of working relationships. The relationship between compensation and satisfaction, all of that is. But you're working again in the environment is such that a chief executive makes I was doing the 150 times now for a FTSE 500 company compared to the average worker. It's enormously differential. So if you have the best talent still wedded to the idea of maximizing personal profits, personal gain, they're going to go in that direction. You have to come up with but if you create a balanced business in which these elements are in some kind of equilibrium, and you are still successful in the market, then I think by slowly these various dots become connected. And these are the elements of the new economy. It works. I mean, one of the reasons I sort of moved away from conventional stuff is because it's very difficult to avoid the attractions of working in this conventional workplace, especially if you're successful, because they basically stuff you with material rewards and it makes it difficult. And then they chain you in another way, a whole set of other invisible chains. If you have the means, both psychological and perhaps material, you can pull out and say, I don't engage. But work cannot be atomized at a universal level. It's very, very difficult. I mean, we're living in a world which requires cooperation, requires sharing, requires exchange of information, of knowledge, and so on. You can't have an economy based on cobblers and artisans, bakers. People, you can do it on the edges of the economy, but not the economy as a whole. And this is, I think, part of the reimagining exercise. It's going to take a long time, I think, if you have. But every step in that direction is a step forward. Is a step of, and all the problems and obstacles that you face may appear daunting, and they are. They are very daunting. But the more you overcome them, the more I think you establish, I think, your essential freedom, which is a component of understanding the whole realm that is not seen. You cannot engage in a meaningful way with the claims of the universe of the unseen if you're not free. Yeah, but free in the existential sense, not in a.
Thank you, everyone. Time to bring this session to a close and begin our next physics. So thank you so much.
Thank you all.